take it away, Joe. Thank you for being here.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us. I'm Joe Moriarty. I have worked in my capacity with OPI for, just trying to figure that out last night. Not as long as my partner Keith, but getting, kind of keeping that gap, about 11 years. So my educational background as a professional educator, I guess I should say, is 24 years in the classroom as a middle school math teacher primarily, but I taught some other subjects as well, math, science, even language arts and history at the middle school level. Then I became an assistant principal at Sacagawea Middle School in Bozeman for 7 years. And then I retired from that school district back in, 2012. And since then, I did a variety of jobs, but I knew I wasn't going to totally retire. But started working for Office of Public Instruction in about 2013 as an MBI consultant. And then we moved to MTSS and MTS consultant, coach. Love working with teachers, love training. My areas of training now are in check in, check out, check and connect. Love doing the grade 8, which is effective classroom practices, and I do that in concert with Keith often. I also am a apostle or disciple of Eric Jensen and brain-based education. So I am into teaching 14 brain-based principles that are applied to teaching and living. And stress management is another one of my areas of where I'm getting better at it myself. So I have a workshop called Better Stress Management, and that's really what it's about, is how we get better at getting better. That's the Japanese concept of Kaizen. So I apply that to, and everything that I do really, and that includes coaching. And I get to co-coach one of the school districts outside of Great Falls with Keith. So enough about me.
Joe, we had a comment from Valerie. She said, I need stress management right now.
Could you restate the name of what that was, Joe?
Which one, Valerie?
Your stress management.
Oh, I just it's called Better Stress Management. Yep. And I'm doing that for the Billings School District coming up next month. I'm also doing it at the Counselors Convention in in Helena in April. And then that will be at Summer Institute in Bozeman as well.
Awesome. Thank you.
You bet.
All right. So I'm on Keith Hoyer, stress management. It's Husky Nation week here in Belt because we're starting district tournaments. I don't have my holidays confused. I am purposely wearing a Christmas outfit because it's your favorite holiday is today during Husky Nation week. So that's why I'm wearing so I chose Christmas, probably because I had a Christmas sweater. Anyway, I've been an educator. This is my 28th year in Belt and then my 15th year at OPI. And so we'll jump right into it. You ready, Ann? I can share my screen. We're ready to roll. So today we're going to talk about PBIS within a multi-tiered framework. Just real quick, how many people know what PBIS is? Has everyone heard of PBIS? Okay, most have. Okay, that's good. So what we're going to do, or what we're going to talk about, is an introduction to PBIS and then kind of the brief overview of the why. And so anytime you guys have a question or something, just raise your hand or stop and we'll try to explain things. We'll go through it. And we do want a chance at the end to report out too. Okay, so our goal is to, okay, why is this not working? All right, my thing's not. Oh, there we go. Finally advanced. Okay. Is to have an overview, like I said, a multi-tiered framework, and then some examples of PBIS, and then how we've seen it work in schools. And so, and any questions that we can help you guys with, especially in a special ed environment. So our first thing is just a definition, because we always try to define things right out of the gate of what PBIS is. And so like I have it on the board there, but it's bigger than that. People always ask me, like, what is PBIS in a nutshell? And my elevator speech is how it changes environments. And what do we do to change the environment? And one of the things that Joe talks in is better stress management. This is we got this from Joe with better stress management, is E plus R equals O. And I'm going to turn that over to Joe because this is kind of his area in better stress management. I use this all the time in my classroom though.
Yeah, this is, thanks, Keith. This is one of my, as a math teacher, I obviously taught a lot about equations and how you simplify equations and what they do and how they model different things. Well, I think this is probably one of the most important equations there is. And it's all about, Keith said, we talk about changing environments. So in the PBIS world, positive-based interventions and supports is what that acronym basically stands for. And we set up an environment where you can influence behavior. I also taught classroom management at MSU. That classroom management, we all, at least back in my day, we would talk about, gosh, you get out into the school system and you're just not prepared to teach, and because of lack of classroom management classes. And I always say that's gotten better. People, I think that we can safely say that. But if I'm talking about my classroom management class, and it could be narrowed down to one concept, that we ultimately have control of one person's behavior in our classroom, and we know who it is. It's us. So
it's not going to work to send it to her that way. They're going to have to do something different for that one.
It is kind of weird that she doesn't have an email, but.
Can you hear me? Am I coming through clear, Ann?
Yes, you are, Joe.
Yeah,
Okay, perfect.
yeah, you are.
Yeah. So this equation is, we're setting up the classrooms with positive-based interactions, and that influences not only our students' behavior, but I think our behavior as an educator too. So we can blame the outcomes of our behavior in life to events, to other people, to the situation, the stresses that are out there. And I don't have time to go into the whole stress thing, but we use the definition of stress incorrectly too. So this is my long way of getting this equation. The event plus the response is what the outcome is. Here's a simple example for an event in my life that I've allowed to have a weird outcome. In the world of driving down the road, and you come up behind a semi. I'm on the interstate now. You come up behind a semi that's passing another semi, and they're driving about 1/4 of a mile an hour faster than the semi that they're passing. You've been there. It takes them 20 minutes to make the pass. That's the event. My response to that event used to be, why did he do this? I'm pounding on the steering wheel. It's slowing down traffic. Oh, he's decided to pass right on the hill so he can't get around. What was he thinking? And so the outcome for me, because of my response or my reaction, is stress. It's worthless. I'm not going to change that situation. So when we talk to kids about, in a world of PBIS, MTSS, one of the things, and we'll talk about this today, is setting expectations. And we put out the word responsibility oftentimes. And if you take the word responsibility and you divide it into two parts, responsibility, What does that look like? What is our ability to respond? So every situation can be reframed. And I reframe now. I refrain and I reframe the situation when I'm slowed down on the highway. Oh, it's a time for me to slow down in life. It's a time for me to look over at this town I'm passing by. There's Whitehall, Montana. I never noticed how pretty that town is. So the event plus the response is the outcome. And this is something that we can teach to our kids within a positive climate situation. All situations are reframable.
One of the reasons we started out with that too is PBIS, like I said, is changing environments. And so you're not going to change the behavior, but you can change the environment in which the behavior occurs. And so this is one that's really been useful. Dr. Tim Lewis from the University of Missouri first came out with that, or showed us in Montana 20 some years ago, the ABCs, and how you divert or change the consequences. The outcome is what the desire may be. It's changing that response component. And so he called it blowing up the bridges. And this works really well. When I talk to kids in a class, I often say, it's not the event that you're in trouble for or why we're having this conversation. It's your response to the event. And so just by doing that little conversation with a kid, a behavior problem, we can alleviate a ton of behaviors in the classroom. And it's more of an approach than anything. Like I said, you're not going to change the behavior, but you can change the environment in which the behavior occurs. So that's kind of a basis of what PBIS is for us from an overview, is changing our environment. But we did put 10 different things down. And so there's oftentimes we see 6 and we've seen 7. Joe and we've put 10. The first 4 are the first 4. They parallel the first 4 of the grade 8. And Joe does a great training, or we both train on grade 8. It all starts, no matter where you are in the PBIS world, with universal expectations. And so that's kind of the foundation of all that we do in the PBIS world. Okay. The difference between oftentimes a school that does not, it's not a PBIS school, or a school that is literally there are expectations in the school that has PBIS. There's no rules, there's expectations. Because as Joe often tells a great story of rules on the playground. Do you want to tell them that when you were a principal, weren't you, Joe? Tell us that story about how many different rules they had.
Yes. So when I took over as assistant principal at Sacagawea, my one major responsibility for me, of course, was discipline, the school climate. And I took a look at where we were having a lot of issues, behavioral issues. And of course, that was at lunchtime. And lunchtime in Bozeman, we had duty-free lunch. So we would have aides that would be our lunchtime supervisors. And we set them up for a very difficult job, because when I first took that spot, I went, what? There's 35 playground rules, and all of them were stated negatively. No this, no this, no, 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 don't. And it was like interesting how kids, brings out the street lawyers. You don't have a rule against no spitting into the wind so that it can, come back to fall all over my peers. That's not one of your rules. And first thing I did was, no, those rules are gone, and we're going to go with the universal expectations that we have for our school. Be respectful, be responsible. Those 2 things right there. That's all we needed for playground behavior. And as Keith says, if you don't have those expectations posted and reviewed and demonstrated, then they only become just a poster on the wall or wording. But you have to live by those. One of the things that we had, it's built into these 10, but PBIS, MTSS is about speaking a common language too. So even though we can have different routines and procedures within our classrooms, you might have some procedures that are, how does respect look like during my science lab? And that might look different than Keith's business class, but we're still speaking a common language. We still have a, universal expectations when we talk about respect and responsibility. There's a general shared concept to the school about what that looks like.
So moving on with the procedures and routines, and Joe touched on a little bit, but routines are, I think, a backbone of office or classroom management. You should have a routine for everything. And when we go into schools and we work specifically with PBIS, we establish routines for everything. You think through your school day of whether you're turning in papers or asking to use the restroom or how you even answer questions, make those routines, and routines become procedures. And procedures oftentimes end a lot of the classroom discipline problems that we have. All the best first year teachers I've ever experienced all had clearly defined routines for how to do everything. And that's the easiest way and the most effective way out of the gate to change your classroom environment. A school-wide reinforcement system, we want to catch kids doing the right thing. And one of our myths later on that we debunk is that it just gives out, candies. I think there was the Missoula schools had that video one time and they said, well, what's PBIS? And the little girl said, oh, that's the one we get Jolly Rancher candies. Well, no, we have a school-wide reinforcement system because just like we like to be reinforced, students do too. And so the school-wide reinforcement system that we use in PBIS varies from school to school. This is not a cookie cutter program. And so when we work with schools, that's one of the first things that we set up. Believe it or not, if you do PBIS and you've taught expectations and you have procedures and or routines that became procedures in your classroom, there's still going to be students that mess up. That's another myth, is that we don't punish kids or we don't correct kids. We do. There is a system for an error correction, clearly defined. And like Joe said, a common language spoken throughout the school. And so that's absolutely essential for having PBIS in your classroom or in your school, is to have a system in place, a framework for how to address students who do, and they're going to break the rules or break the expectations. Next one is building a strong team. We can't stress this enough, that you'd have to have a strong team that has to include a principal or leadership. Without leadership, this doesn't go anywhere. And the other thing too is at the district level, and our grant schools have been working at the district level. What we found out is you can embed it into the district level. It's far more likely that it's going to be successful after either the facilitator or the person who is in charge or the team leader or the PBIS person in your school leaves, or even the principal leaves. It outlives one person. The classroom best practices, well, those were those first 4. And on my next slide, I have the next 4 that we actually participate in the classroom. And we'll go over those in just a second. Data-based decision-making. All the decisions that we make, we use data to drill down on. There's the great book of Get Off the Dead Horse, quit beating the dead horse, that one. We see that all the time. We worked in a school one time that the school pride was way down and all this kind of, the first thing they did is they fired the basketball coach and they fired the cheerleading advisor because school pride was down. Had nothing to do with that. We as adults oftentimes make decisions in committees without looking down at the data and drilling down with the data. One of the really cool things, and I think one of the most important things that we do as far as the grant schools that are going through the process right now, is how to drill down with data. And so that's an entire that's probably a 3-hour presentation. And I think at the Summer Institute, the guy that wrote the data-driven school is going to be there. So I'd show up to the Summer Institute because we still use that book in all the things that we do, including our PBIS. The next one is celebrate climate. Celebrate your wins. I don't think schools do that enough. Utilize student voice. Joe and I are huge proponents of student voice. We ask, when we have the expectations, we ask the kids to define what respect means to them. I'll guarantee their idea of respect is different than what we have. Ask them to help define your expectations. And then the last one, of course, is building relationships. Everybody knows as a teacher that that's the most essential thing that you're going to do, is build a relationship with the students in order to move forward with any program. Joe, you got anything to wrap up before we go to the next 4 of the grade 8?
Yeah, I would just say a couple of things. And number one is we have building relationships down at the 10th position there. Certainly not because that's the order of its importance, but I do like that it's at the bottom, actually, because I think that's foundational. That's what it's all about. You influence behavior based on the relationship that you have with the student. So and building relationships happens in a positive environment much quicker, obviously. Back to student voice for a second. Like Keith said, we're both firm believers in this. Getting it used to be called My Voice, now it's just called Student Voice. Student Voice survey from the Quality Institute that was used in a lot more schools when it didn't cost the schools anything. But boy, it still should be such an integral part. Getting the voice of the students, having them, help with the definition of responsibility and respect, and that, like Keith mentioned, following that up with focus groups, and those focus groups become pretty doggone insightful about, what kids notice in a school, and they can help with enhancing the climate. The other place that I think we've done some really good work, you knew it was probably going to come, man, but I'm going to advocate for what we did for many years was MBI Youth Days. Great platform for student voice. We resurrected it last spring in Missoula. We had an MTSS student leadership conference put together at MTSS Youth Days in Missoula. And then we followed that up with another one this fall in Great Falls, and trying to utilize that student voice where they would actually have a bigger part in putting the conference together. And it was great. We're hoping that we can maybe put together another 2 of them for next fall. There's some tricky funding that's involved, but Anne was a big part of that in helping us put together both the one last spring and the one in the fall. These students from Belt were integral in the one that we had in Great Falls. So yeah, it's all part of PBIS, I think.
So we wanted the first 4 on that list are the first 4 of the grade 8, and then the second 4 I have on the next slide. These are all things that are best practices within the classroom. So, preaching to the choir, but it's interesting. Like we still, to this day, after we're doing this for 10 years in our school, go over these every year and we revisit them. It's oftentimes interesting to see as a high school teacher what the elementary teachers are doing, like especially with opportunities to respond. Special ed teachers do amazing things on getting kids to participate. And so listen to the experts in your building is one thing that we always suggest, because every building has experts. And so there are active supervision opportunities to respond, sequencing and choice in the classroom. It's amazing what choice can do, not only for classroom management, but also for your academics in your classroom. And then academic success and task difficulty. And for special ed, this is, if you hand someone a big thick book and say, here's your test, like my accounting book, but if I break my accounting book up into chapters, it seems much more manageable. Okay, and there's lots of tips and tricks that we do. But like I said, the grade 8 we have even a 6-hour training on the grade 8, anywhere from 3 to 6 hours. So we don't quite have time to go into too much with that today, darn it. I
just-
love this. Oh, go ahead.
Can I say, can you go back? Can I say something about number 7? Just really quick.
Oh, yeah. Do you see it?
Yeah,
Okay.
thank you. So sequencing and choice in the classroom. I think a concept that continues to be overwhelming for educators is differentiation. And differentiation, my personal interpretation of that at one point was, oh my God, differentiation. Does that mean I have to have a different lesson plan for each kid in my classroom? How do you do that? I can't keep up with one lesson plan. But I try to put educators at ease myself as a classroom teacher, my staff, and now teachers that I work with out in the field. I think that word choice, sequencing and choice, and sequencing how you're building your lesson, and you start out with an overall problem you're solving, however that looks, and you move from basic to more difficult. But that choice piece, I think that's, if you add choice in your lessons to some degree, then that's a huge part of differentiation. So sometimes it means offering them a choice of assessment. You can take this particular concept and do an oral test with me versus a traditional written test. Okay. Or the choice to come in and make revisions on a test or an assessment, or the choice to do this activity versus this activity, the choice of who I get to do this activity with. Choices, semi-synonymous. Ooh, I don't even know if that's a word. Semi-synonymous with differentiation.
Right.
Keith,
Yeah.
before we go on,
Yeah.
I'd like to hear from some of the audience on just if they connect with one of those great 8
yeah.
and if they would want to share out a comment
perfect.
or something that resonates with them on one of the great 8 items that Keith and Joe have talked about.
I always love hearing what people do for like opportunities to respond. Anybody got a really cool one?
Valerie, you unmuted yourself. Were you going to talk?
I was,
Oh, good.
the one that resonates with me is that first one, when the universal expectations, and that it's not rules, because I spent some time in the preschool program today, and I heard a lot of no, stop. And so getting them to reframe, oh, I like when your feet are on the floor and when you're walking to line up, and using more of those. And then, because then that does become your procedures and your routines, and it just all flows into one another, I feel.
Or you say, how can you tell me how we line up? And if they can recite, how we're supposed to line up properly, that's a great tool. Okay, just by the way you phrase the question is awesome. That's really good. Thank you, Valerie. Anybody else have one? We got to move on to my funny graphic. My gridlock. So it's funny because if everybody is driving at the same time, this is where we got to drill down. I show this all the time to the schools and going, okay, but we're all complaining about the same thing, but we need to drill down to the root of the problem. It's obviously there's a bigger problem than, well, as you can see in the picture, everybody's a single car driver. Everybody gets off work at the same time. Drilling down as to what the core of the problem is. And that's one of the keys to MTSS or PBIS is drilling down in the data to find out the why. And so in this case, is it because, everybody, I don't know, I was outside of Everett, Washington, and it's like an 8-lane highway, and there's like 4 cars. And I'm like, why would they build an 8-lane highway for 4 cars? Well, it turns out Boeing is there. And when Boeing has a shift change, they need all 8 lanes. And so, I mean, whoever did the planning on that, probably they figured that out. So, yeah, is it because, you know, nobody's carpooling? Is it because we don't have public transportation? I mean, there's so much you can go in depth with these pictures. The next one too, I love this one. And I say this all the time when we go to the schools. Don't blame the lettuce. Hey, there's a reason why the lettuce isn't growing. Is it because you didn't fertilize it? You didn't water it? You didn't take care? I mean, there's a whole bunch of reasons why the lettuce isn't growing. And that's where we drill down to make those data-based decisions. So once we establish our expectations and we have our procedures in place and we have all that, okay, now where does it go? There's 3 different legs to the school. There's data. Well, there's the practices. By the way, most of the schools that we go into, and Joe can attest to this, the first thing they want is the practice. Well, they want a tier 2 practice. Can you tell me a practice I can have or do in my school to alleviate this behavior? What they need is a system, because there's probably a reason why that's happening, or a framework. And so the systems equal the data and the practices are all a part of that 3-legged stool. And so drilling down with the data is so important when we go into schools, as to find out the why. Does anybody have any questions on? I love that graphic though. Don't blame the lettuce. I say that often. So if you ever hear me say, don't blame the lettuce, it's probably we need to drill down and find out the why. Okay. This is kind of a brief like we said at the beginning, our objective was to give you a brief overview of what implementation looks like. You know, create a team. It starts with the team. It has to have an administrator on it. Identify and teach your 3 to 5 school-wide expectations. You can't just identify it. We've been in schools where they have the posters and they're really cool posters, but that's all they are. It's just a poster on the wall. If you don't teach the expectations, then it's really hard to expect it. And we have a saying on that coming up. Next one is develop a system to acknowledge or encourage appropriate behavior. And we listed that one earlier. That's part of the grade 8. Develop a system to discourage. Okay, we said that's part of the grade 8. And then develop a system to evaluate and implement. And if you don't have the evaluation and implementation piece, or if you're not implementing it with fidelity, when we first started this 15 years ago at Belt, we thought we were doing an awesome job until someone came in from OPI and they did a TFI in our school. And it turns out that myself and the 3 other people or 4 other people that were really all in were doing a pretty good job. We were doing some things wrong too, but it didn't go beyond us. And so it was huge for us to do an evaluation. So we just got done doing our evaluation at Belt just last week. Still to this day, we see the importance of doing an evaluation, even though we've done it for 15 years. And it's because there are things that we're not doing with fidelity, and we need to understand those. And it's okay. If we don't have something in place, that's okay. Our goal is not to necessarily have everything in place all the time, 100%, because there's some things that don't need to be in place or are not relevant for what we're using right now. And so that's that evaluation process. It constantly changes. It's a working document. None of this is written in stone. That's the other thing about PBIS. It's different in every school that you go into, which is a good thing. It's not a binder on the shelf. You don't get to open it up and thumb through the pages and complete the steps and aha, you have a PBIS. Here's our big ideas. And I'm going to say the first one, because this is my saying that I say at every single school I ever go to. If you expect it, teach it. And if you teach it, expect it. And that is the foundation of everything that we do with PBIS. I'm going to turn it over to Joe because he talks a lot about creating an environment that influences behavior. Joe?
Yeah, it's back to, I tell you, that concept about classroom management. You're creating that environment that influences behavior. You have ultimate control over one person's behavior in that classroom, and it's you, the teacher. And so I know that when we talk about, well, I just wanted to share this quick story with you. I was going in to teach the grade 8, and in a Billings school district and at their administration office, the Lincoln Center, and you have to check in with a security person at the booth, and he said, I've seen this now. You've checked in before. What is this grade 8 stuff all about? And I said, well, grade 8 is 8 effective classroom practices that are timeless, have stood the test of time, nothing earth shattering, nothing new. And he goes, is that all there is? Is 8? And I said, well, there's probably, we could change the 8 to 8 times 8, because within those 8, there's specific practices. And so I think one of the practices that I talk about, I use Doug Lemov's Teach Like a Champion stuff that we put into the grade 8 and go, this one fits perfect for expectations. This one fits perfect for routines. Some of them overlap. You see them, several times. But one of the things is emotional constancy. And so if you're creating an environment that influences behavior, you as a teacher, one of the things that the MOV really preaches is that you have emotional constancy as a teacher, and we're all human. I've lost it at different times. As an administrator, as a classroom teacher, but when you show that composure and you're not the lecturer. I got great at not lecturing kids for discipline stuff. I bring them in after school. If I told them, I just tap them on the shoulder, I need to see you for 5 minutes after school. And my 5 minutes look like this. Okay, I'm listening. What do you mean you're listening? Why are you here? Well, I'm here because you said I had to be. And I go, well, yeah, and I can be here. I'm going to be here till 5 o'clock. So why are you here? Well, because I showed up to class for the 3rd day in a row. I'm prepared. What can I expect tomorrow? I'll bring my stuff. Great. So it wasn't 5 minutes. It wasn't a 5-minute interaction. It ended up being 2 when they decided that they're going to take responsibility for their behavior. Again, I wasn't going to lecture. So you influence that behavior by being, I had a teacher in one of my U of M classes when I was getting certified to teach that said one of the ways that you create a great environment and one that has, disciplined, respectful students is you are beautifully prepared for your lesson. You know where it's going to go. So that's the environment is organized, it's prepared, it's full of emotional constancy. It is encouraging positive behavior because you're looking for the positives, and you communicate expectations and you review those expectations when you need to. As a school at Sacagawea, when we didn't have a little quick review on expectations and what it looked like at an assembly, we have kids go crazy sometimes, and sometimes it was they weren't trying to be mean-spirited, they were trying to show their enthusiasm, but you do certain things that comes off as disrespect to the speaker. Remember that you're going to be sitting with your advisory teacher. This isn't there is somewhat of a seating chart, so common language, looking for the positives, encouraging positive behavior, holding kids accountable, being organized, all of those things are what influences behavior. I know on the next bullet, 4 to 5 positives to 1 negative. Wow, that's a great ratio. That's what we want. And it's not always that easy to attain, is it, Keith?
No, one time I actually videoed myself in the classroom to see how many positives and negatives I was doing, because I'm not coordinated enough to, like, some teachers have a note card and they put a little rip on the long side of the card for every positive thing they say, and for every negative thing, interaction they have, they put a little tear on the short side, and then at the end they look at the card. Well, I couldn't do that, or put a piece of tape or mark something. So I thought I'd just video myself, and then I'd sit down and do a video of evaluation. And I put the camera up. I knew what I was looking for, and I still didn't hit the 4 to 1. It's not as easy as what you think of having those positive interactions. You have to really work at it and try to hit that 4 to 1. We try to That's a big part of what we do here, and part of our PBIS at Belt is even in our report cards. So if you get 4 to 1 positive and negative interactions on a report card sent home to parents, you get a free coffee on Fridays. So we just had the end of our midterm was Monday. Any teacher got 4 to 1 gets free coffee tomorrow. So that's kind of exciting. Taking on student voice, we already talked about student voice, and I know we're running low on time, but one thing on student voice, and Joe kind of touched on this, if you call it student voice in your school, you have to listen. Because if you call it student voice and then you don't listen, it actually has a negative impact on your environment. So if you're going to say we have a student voice, survey, or we're going to listen to the students, or a focus group, and then you don't, change doesn't come from that, you actually have, it makes it worse. The other one, our big idea is change takes time. None of this, the grant schools that are in it now, some of them are in their 3rd year. It's 3 to 5 years before we see change. Change doesn't happen overnight. And part of it is, I don't think I've been to a school that wanted to overhaul everything in 1 year, and it doesn't work. It's a process. Okay. The framework takes time to process. And so I always tell schools, look for the smallest change that makes the biggest difference. And there's surveys through PBIS apps out there. One of them is like the SAS survey. The SAS survey allows or teachers to say whether or not it's in place, but it also has a component where they get to rate it. Is it a high priority? So when we look at the SAS survey, we look at things that are maybe not quite in place, but they're high priority. Those are quick hitters. So that we can go into a school and we can say, look, it's not quite in place and it's a high priority. Let's get this done, and we'll show the teachers that we're moving forward in MTSS. Or if it's not in place and it's a low priority, don't address that one. Put that one off for another year. That's not something we need to waste our time. Look at the smallest change that makes the biggest difference, and then do those small things well. Start slow, and then of course pace yourself. Yeah.
Back up to student voice just for a second.
Oh yeah.
Because you made the point, when we give a student voice survey, that it's imperative that one follows that up with looking at the data. What is this data saying? What are the students saying about our school? Is it a welcoming environment? Whatever it might be. And then you drill down and figure out, okay, what is this? What is about this? That's why you bring those students back together in focus groups, and you say, hey, look, this says that 45% of our students think that not a welcoming environment. Where do you think that comes from? And they can be extremely insightful. And I think just, putting merit in them taking the time to do that survey, and you're listening. And I just have to share this thing quickly with you. At the high school forum this year in Helena, I went to one of Matthew Johnson, who's the alternative high school principal in Browning, and we visited his school. Keith and I have before, and Matthew's he is a stud educator. He's an amazing guy, and I remember him saying this in his workshop, and I think this is kind of what I got to be like as an assistant principal and a disciplinarian, but because I took that job, and people would say, if you have kids come to that office that they're sent to you out of class, you got to hammer them. And then we want to know what happened, because that's not what's happened, with the previous administrator, whatever. The demands were on me, a person who taught at that set school. And Matthew Johnson said, when I hear that kind of stuff, I just say, what this kid needs is a good listening to. And that will always resonate with me, just the way he framed that. Importance of listening to our student voice. So it's not just an official survey, it's one-on-one. It's why is this kid hurting? Why are they acting out? Truly listening.
Joe, we have a question from Chad.
Yes.
Well, actually, that was a clap. a
Oh.
fat man, just because I totally agree with that, you know, those most difficult circumstances where you've got a kid who's done something, it takes a lot of extra time, but I always found as the dean of students in that role, that if you take the time to spend with the kid, you can build a really good working relationship. And it doesn't mean that they're going to just leave your office and instantly start behaving and meeting all the expectations. But it does mean that they leave your office knowing that you care, and that there's an expectation that they get better at responding in those situations in ways that are appropriate. It's a progression, and it takes time.
Yeah, that's that foundation piece of building those relationships too, Chad. So thank you for that. Our other big ideas, and like I said, I think we only have about 10 minutes, don't we? So we want to give some question and answer time. So we're going to go through this kind of quick, is make it fit, because like I said, PBIS, MTSS looks different in every school, and make it fit with your community, your culture, your families. Like Chad said, build relationships and then foster that buy-in. What Joe said with the student voice is you have to be heard. Well, the same thing with the teachers too. We give things like the SAS survey. We come back and we say, we heard you. You said this wasn't in place, but it's a high priority. So this is what we're going to do to address it. And then you get buy-in when you start doing those type of things, because they feel included. They feel like they're a stakeholder. We do have a common language, and I like this graphic because it's starting off with identifying and defining the behavior expectations, and then teaching it, and then reteaching it, monitoring, okay, acknowledging, establishing a continuum of responsive behavior, and then using data for the decision. Remember what I said, the lettuce isn't growing. There's probably a reason. Okay. We do have 3 myths that we want to bust real quick, and then we want to open it up for some questions and see if you guys have any comments. So our first one is just the positive in PBIS means we just give out rewards. And we've heard this everywhere we go. It's not the case. First of all, we don't give out rewards in any case. We always call it reinforcers. A reward is just that. So if Johnny turns his homework in and I give him a Jolly Rancher candy, and next day he doesn't turn his homework in, that was a reward. I rewarded Johnny for turning his homework in. But if Johnny turns his homework in and I respond to him by saying, Johnny, thank you, you've been responsible. That's one of our things in our classroom, that you turned your homework in on time. I appreciate that. And then I reinforced him that he didn't get just that he turned his homework, he turned his homework in on time accurately. And that's the reinforcer. And so we do have to, there's a fine line. When we do this for a couple hours, Joe and I, we always show this video, mindset video, and how you phrase things. So once again, it's not a reward we're giving out. We give out reinforcers. We reinforce the expectation that the student is doing correctly. Okay. Joe, do you want to piggyback on anything, and we'll move on?
Yes, I would just add this to that. And so Keith, is that I think the greatest reinforcer is, and it's again, after that relationship's been built, is just how Keith reinforced that young man, young gal, student handing in their homework. And it's the high five, it's the touch, it's the putting your hand on their shoulder and saying, you're really improving on those topic sentences like we talked about. And that's not to say that we can't give out tangible things like bucks, broncs, or whatever that might look like, the school-wide reinforcement system. But the best reinforcer is that interaction and the relationship between the teacher and the student, between the administrator and the student, after that relationship's been built. So, yeah.
And Joe had a good point too. It has to be immediate, and it has to be specific. You know, I can't just walk by and a student's drawing something, I say, good job. I have to be more specific in what they're doing well. Because if you're not specific, then you may be reinforcing something they're not doing well. All right, here's myth number 2 is we will no longer give children consequences for inappropriate behavior. And no, that's absolutely false. Students are still going to mess up, and we do have those consequences written out. In a lot of the schools, they have a behavioral consequence flow chart or behavior flow chart. That provides consistency, and there's a ton of examples online for a behavior flow chart. This separates them in from minors and majors. What is being dealt with in class or at the principal's office. We used to play this really cool game that's called Pass the Buck. And you could either they had Pass the Buck cards, or you could take actual office referrals. And we did it in a staff meeting. You have your principal up at the front, and you'd go around and you would read through, without names, of course, you'd read through any of the office referrals. And then the teacher would say, how would they solve that, or how would they address that in their classroom? Or would they pass the buck and pass it to the principal? And if they pass the buck, then the principal would tell the staff how he would handle that situation. And it was kind of nice because Joe said, hammer them. And then the teachers found out that maybe the principal was actually doing something when they turn in an office referral. It was a great communication setup. But it also, we found out that if you have high office referrals because Sally's turning them in because, Johnny's not coming prepared because he didn't bring a pencil, we can alleviate some of those. And we talk about how we give up some of the power when we start sending kids to the office. And so that's a whole nother training too. Our myth number 3 is PBIS will take away instructional time. And we've proved in schools all the way from, say, Helena Capital, that went, I don't remember how many office referrals they had, down to, a couple hundred. How much instructional time did that save those teachers for not having to sit there and argue with a student in the class? If you can get your office referrals down, I looked last night, and we just had our board meeting Tuesday. And so we had 10. We've had 10 office referrals this year. If you can get your office referrals, then it allows your principal, who's the educational leader of your school, to spend time in your classroom helping teachers become better teachers. I think that's why they went in to become a principal, not to discipline students. So if you could spend less time disciplining students and more time making sure the school is an effectively run school, everyone wins. And so there's a ton of examples on saving instructional time, but I see we are winding down. We only got like 5 minutes left, Joe. Hey, we completed it, Joe. That's pretty darn good, isn't it? So
Yeah.
we want to open this up to some questions or concerns or anything you guys want to add. We're going to open it up. Here's our emails too, if you want to email any of us.
And Joe's is JOEF
Oh
Moriarty.
my God, it is. Oh my goodness, it's Joe F. Moriarty. I'm so sorry,
Good
Joe.
catch.
That's my
Good
fault.
catch, Danny. Good
That's a
catch.
You can also do Joe Moriarty, joe.moriarty@mt.gov, because he sometimes gets paid by us as well.
Ann, do you have any questions?
I do not, but this was great information. And I think people are still processing. So please take advantage and email Joe or Keith if you guys, have something that you think about later, even tonight or tomorrow, whenever. They are great assets to have as part of our OPI team. And so we use them a lot for presentations and just to get information from. So thank you so much, you two, for taking time today and sharing your information. Does anybody have any comments they'd like to share with Joe or Keith?
Oh, I see.
Well, and I missed the beginning. Did schools on the call, and maybe Megan's going to speak, but I was just curious if schools on the call got to share like where they were at with PBIS, or if they're doing PBIS, but Megan might have had a question or something to say or share.
I just have a quick one on like recess. So we just, in my mind, I don't feel like we're doing it how, I don't know, maybe just I think it should be done. But we have a recess log. So if there's any issues at recess, kids get written into like the recess log or whatever. And then for all the kids like at the end of the month that haven't been written in the recess log book, we do like a positive party or whatever. when I kind of started here, I was like, well, it's the same kids in the recess logbook every single time pretty much. And so instead of going to the recess logbook, or instead of going to the recess party, the kids would go like into a classroom and we would talk about, you know, why they were in the recess logbook or whatever. But like, I guess I'm looking for guidance more of like what other schools do, because in my opinion too, like, I think that at the end of the month, if someone's, you know, the positive party or not, or whatever, I feel like it's too long for kids to remember, especially, I mean, elementary school, to remember like what they did at recess, but me a month ago. So how do other, I guess, other schools like reinforce the positive behavior at recess? And I'm also, I mean, a special ed teacher, so I feel like a lot of times it's like my behavior kids that are always in the recess logbook. So I don't know, guidance on that a little bit, I guess.
So
I think,
oh, go ahead, Joe. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Megan, I would say this, I think that reflection piece is good. So it sounds like they're not getting the reflection piece where they have to explain why they're in the recess log, right? And then the other kids are getting that party at that point. So you are acknowledging the positive behavior. There's a reflection piece, but it sounds to me like what's missing maybe is that reflection piece needs to take place sooner. Like you said, they don't remember why they're there. Like, I love the processing time, and you're listening to the kids. And so maybe if that reflection time is done a little bit sooner, more timely, it might be more effective. That's the first thing that jumped out at me.
Yeah, and the quicker the response time as to the incident, the more effective the reinforcement is, or deterrent. If you're waiting a month for you to talk over, you know, a restorative practice that happened a month ago, that's probably not going to be as effective as something that was immediate. So as to why the students, do you know what behavior? I mean, I'd start drilling down as what behaviors are occurring on the playground too, because if they're consistent, it could be things like active supervision. Do you have aides out there on the playground? Are they, where are they standing? Has the expectations been clearly outlined as to what we expect you to do onto the playground? Because oftentimes kids get busted for something that they didn't even know that was an expectation. So having those clearly defined expectations for playgrounds really starts eliminating some of the problems on the playground. So I even to like one time in Havre, I saw a little guy, he had to say brim, and I can't remember exactly what brim stood for, but like be responsible, respect others, you know. Anyway, when he got the R, it was respect others. And she goes, well, what does that mean? I think be responsible was he was going to bring his coat out on the playground. So he had to say brim before he could ever get to the playground, because he was one of those kids that was on the list all the time. And so he got the R, and it was respect others. And she was like, well, what does respect others mean? And he said, I don't throw rocks at kids on the playground, because apparently that was an issue. That's why he'd been written up several times. And so he had to just reflect on what the expectations were before he had access to the playground. I hate seeing people miss a party at the end because of that. I mean, that's, I'm not sure that's kind of a negative reinforcer, and we don't want that. So I would have him preload the expectation versus punish him for not doing it at the end, in my opinion.
Thank you.
Anything else?
Okay, well, we are out of time. I'm going to hit stop recording.
And if you guys have any questions,